Hello.
It's time to... We are back announcing our 90,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. If you want to just go straight to the video, the time is right here. Otherwise, we're giving away 3 lightsabers. Let's get straight into it. Thank you all for 90,000 subscribers. We're so close to hitting that 100,000 milestone. The first one we give away is the Padawan tier, and the winner for the Padawan tier is... Congratulations, Scott. We will be emailing you for your Padawan lightsaber. This will be for the master lightsaber that we are giving away. Congratulations to... I'm not going to try and say that. We'll be reaching out to you very soon. And lastly, the winner of the replica lightsaber in our 90,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway, and the winner is... Congratulations. I'll be reaching out to all of you guys. Thank you all for 90,000 subscribers. I'm so thankful for all of you for joining me on this journey. I can't wait to see you at 100K.
Our story begins on Mustafar in the industrial facilities where Jedi Master Obi Wan Kenobi was fending off an attack being pressed by the Chosen One, Anakin Skywalker. The two of their blades interlocked at speeds not seen in a millennia. Two individuals who knew each other better than anyone else in the galaxy, and the peak of their performances up until this point in their lives. But Obi-Wan was on a quick backpedal. He knew that Anakin was stronger than him. As a matter of fact, Skywalker knew the same thing. His arrogance and pride would have him convinced that he was the greatest swordsman and best user of the Force the galaxy had ever seen. He was far from. But after wiping the floor with the Jedi inside the temple, killing Sindralik, massacring the temple guards, and killing a defenseless Shaak Ti, he felt unstoppable. Obi-Wan slipped but caught himself. The two of them moved around the interior of the facility. Obi-Wan was taking in the sight behind him as he avoided stepping on slaughtered bodies of those who served the Separatist Council. Despite his disliking for them, he would have much rather seen them spend their lives in jail than be massacred here. It was not just the Jedi thing to do, but it was the just thing to do. Anakin threw his blade forward and Obi-Wan caught it with a block. Their reckless swinging had the two of them colliding their blades together and slamming them across the control panels inside the control room. The structure began hissing and hollering with alarms, but the duelists did not pay any attention to it. Anakin and Obi-Wan continued and made their way into the office-like room of the facility. Kenobi leapt up to a small table, and Anakin found this to be quite disturbing. He saw it as an insult, and so he leapt up onto the table too. Skywalker continued an aggressive assault, throwing Obi-Wan back as the two of them got into a brother-like brawl. But this opened up Obi-Wan for the most crucial mistake of this duel. Anakin was able to somehow lose his lightsaber to Obi-Wan, and Obi-Wan lost his too. But it was a weird predicament. Skywalker managed to get a hold of Obi-Wan's neck with his metallic hand, and instead of wasting his time and continuing the duel, he used his strength to crush Kenobi's neck and kill him on the spot. Anakin looked down at Obi-Wan's lifeless eyes as he lowered him to the ground and told him that it never had to be this way. He turned around, used the Force, pulled his lightsaber back into his hand, and made his way back to Padme's ship. He would take her back to Coruscant so that she could at the very least be taken care of. Inside the Senate building, Sidious and Yoda were having the fight of their lives. Yoda could feel it, the moment Obi-Wan died on Mustafar. Truthfully, it almost knocked him out of the fight, but it made Yoda realize even more that he needed to win this battle. Because if he could kill Sidious, then he'd have to be prepared to fight Skywalker whenever he eventually returned. Yoda didn't know whether or not Anakin would stick to the orders his master gave him, or if he'd completely disregard them. He just had to finish his job and prepare for what came next. Sidious and Yoda were the two most powerful beings in the galaxy, the greatest mastery of both the light and the dark. Their duel would determine the fate of the galaxy for the foreseeable future, especially if Yoda could win, because it would be up to him to stop Skywalker. Sidious launched himself at Yoda as the two of them moved off the speaker's platform to the many pods that surrounded it. Yoda looked up and avoided a number of strikes coming from the Sith Lord, as he tried to get himself into a position to win the fight. Sidious was truly a remarkable opponent, and Yoda had to steady himself to make sure he didn't surrender the battle to the Sith. He and Sidious got separated after another brief collision. Sidious climbed up the pods and began using them as projectiles to throw at Yoda. Though the Jedi Grand Master was a master of the Force, and with that same Force as his ally, he avoided each of these attempts on his life, until he got the chance to take one of the pods and whip it back towards Sidious. The Dark Lord was surprised and he leapt away from his platform. When he landed, confusion washed over his face. He didn't want to lose. He lost to Windu, and that was already embarrassing enough. He could not lose to Yoda. He then turned around and watched Yoda land on the same pod with him. He ignited his lightsaber, and Sidious shot lightning forward at the Jedi Grand Master. Despite his smaller stature, size did not matter. Yoda used the Force and all of his strength to hold back the rising darkness coming from Sidious. A burst started to form between their two hands, and despite this being the first true encounter he had with the Sith Lord in his life, he knew it was coming. Yoda watched out for the burst, and then it came. The two of them were thrown backwards, but Yoda used this to his advantage. The burst threw him into the air, and he allowed it to push him up to the Chancellor's pod in the center of the chambers. He could see Sidious hanging on, laughing or crying out in some crooked voice. Yoda looked for his lightsaber and found it, pulling it into his hands and leaping to where Sidious was. The Dark Lord was trying to figure out where Yoda was. The colors made it especially hard for him to find the Jedi Master, and then he heard something land in front of him. He looked up to where he was holding on at. Sidious panicked, and Yoda, without missing a beat, drove his lightsaber into Sidious's face. Despite his instant victory, shock troopers were on the way. They could hear the commotion. They came to make sure Sidious was alright. They then saw the Jedi Grand Master and opened fire. Yoda blocked their shots with the Force before launching all the shots back into their bodies, killing them all. Yoda knew the Jedi couldn't be blamed for this, so he vanished, eventually getting to Bail Organa and escaping from the Senate building. The two of them would head to the private landing bay in the middle of the Senator's district. The Tantive 4 was parked there with a couple of Alderaanian guards standing watch. Organa told Yoda on the way over that Representative Binks was able to successfully get Keller and Beck and Grogu off the planet. Yoda was pleased with this. Despite the mass destruction of the Order, Grogu was a future, and now Yoda had a life goal. He would train Grogu up into the age of 100. It'd be extremely difficult, and it would put Yoda close to 1,000 years old, which he likely wouldn't make it to. But he knew he needed to be determined if the Order was to survive. With Sidious dead, there was only one more foe for Yoda to worry about. The Grand Master told Bail that he would like time to meditate to himself, and requested for Bail to inform him when or if Skywalker arrived, so that he could take care of him. Bail nodded his head and agreed that he would do as he asked. Yoda found a private room inside the Tantive 4 and focused on the living Force. It was so painful and it was incredibly difficult. He was the first Grand Master in generations to fail this badly, and what made it all the worse is the fact that he wasn't on planet when it happened. He was off-world fighting a war that the Jedi should have never been involved in. Their failure was his greatest failure. Though Yoda remembered something his teachers once told him. While he was nothing but a shadow of the Master that he was before the events of Order 66, he had such an amazing life full of lessons to reflect upon to help him through this moment. Yoda had many failures throughout his life, though after each failure, he learned a lesson. The Force was out of balance because of his own mistakes as a Grand Master. Sure, he wasn't the only voice on the Council, but he had been on the Council and been a Grand Master for more years than not. Yoda knew he couldn't just sit here and blame himself for everything though. Not because he wouldn't take responsibility, but because if he loathed through his failure, he would allow said failure to take control over his life. If Yoda wanted to see the change within the Order, he needed to be that change. The tragedy for the Grand Master is he saw the change, but he was already too late to see it. The death of Master Qui-Gon was a beginning. He was the Jedi who was ahead of the curve, because as it turns out, Qui-Gon was a good Jedi. His lack of adherence to the code may have made him Dooku's little rebellious protege, but what made Qui-Gon so special was his dedication to the light. It's something perhaps Yoda should have seen. He would have been able to see it if he only allowed himself to see it. His failure was catching on too late. Qui-Gon was 10 years ahead of Yoda, and by the time the Clone Wars begun, it was already too late to save the Jedi. Qui-Gon could have saved the Order had he been believed, but it wasn't time to reflect on what could be changed. For Yoda, he needed to remember what his masters taught him and all the things he learned throughout his own life. So that's what he did. As he delved into his own past, he remembered something his very first teacher told him. He was probably 60 years older than Grogu was at the moment, but it was one of the most integral lessons in his entire life. Yoda made a mistake during one of his training sessions, and his teacher, who had been with him since he was just an infant, told him that failure was the greatest teacher. This specific teacher had an influence on Yoda's life. It was the reason why Yoda spoke in broken sentences. It was to always remember who was with him when he was most vulnerable. This lesson of failure is the greatest teacher sat with him, and Yoda decided to delve further into his lessons and remembered the lesson of battle meditation. He hadn't used it since the battle on Toydaria where he protected the 3 clones he was with, and now he could use it here to ensure total victory. By this point, Yoda wasn't planning on being nice to Skywalker. He destroyed the Order. He was now a Sith. To be a Sith was to reject the light, and to reject the light was to be a threat to the greater galaxy. The death of Obi Wan only proved how far Skywalker had fallen. Yoda meditated for hours, and then he was approached by Bail Organa, informing him that Skywalker was seen entering the medical facilities across the city with Senator Amidala. Yoda rose like an undertaker, and told Bail that they would be going there immediately. There was a fire in Yoda's eyes, one that Bail had never seen before. Yoda was going to finish what he should have never allowed to begin years before. The two of them hopped onto a speeder and sped across the city. Yoda looked at the city lights. It was still nighttime, and he felt shame. He told Bail that the Republic would look to a leader in his most desperate time. Bail nodded his head and agreed. Yoda told him that he should rise to the occasion. His passion, his courage would be great for uniting the downtrodden feeling of oppression that currently ruled over the galaxy. Bail shrugged his shoulders, asking how. Yoda simply told him to do whatever was necessary. If he had to temporarily become Emperor, then it would be well worth it for the long run if he could become an Emperor and undo everything Sidious did. However, if it didn't have to come to that, then perhaps he could reinstate the Republic. The ride became silent as Bail sat with the words that Yoda said. He never thought about becoming an Emperor because the idea just didn't appeal to him in the slightest. However, now he was left feeling that maybe he should take control over the Senate, even if he didn't agree with it. What was best for the galaxy was someone like him becoming a temporary emperor. He couldn't let someone like Tarkin or Masameda or any of the other goons that followed Sidious around like lost puppies take control. They all landed on the platform and got to the exterior of the medical facility, and Yoda got out of the ship. He thanked him and then told him that they might part paths here. He wished the Force be with Organa on his endeavors forward in life. They all thanked Yoda and wished the same for him. The Grandmaster continued forward and entered the medical facility. He was able to get to the precise location of Skywalker. Currently, Anakin was a bit distraught. He didn't realize it, but because of the lightheadedness of the choking on Mustafar, Padme wasn't entirely sure who was with her on the ship. She woke up and asked Obi Wan if Anakin was alright before fading out of consciousness. Anakin found this even more incriminating. He hadn't come down from his power high yet. Truthfully, he was much worse than he was before he even killed Obi Wan. To kill his master was such an accomplishment for some reason, and now he was going to kill his new master. First, he needed to make sure Padme was able to get through the birthing process. Though Anakin's focus on his wife was taken away when he felt the presence of someone he didn't expect to have survived the purge enter the room. He heard his name called, and he turned over to see the little green Jedi Master.
Skywalker, pay for what you've done. You will.
You can't stop me. I am more powerful than you could ever dream of.
Dream of power. I do not like your master. Perish you will.
The words crept into Anakin's mind. He hadn't even considered the fact that Sidious wasn't answering because of Yoda. Skywalker's confidence was shattered within an instant, and Yoda ignited his lightsaber. Anakin did the same. He would fight against the Grand Master and avenge Sidious's death. Before he could even legitimately prepare for this, Yoda launched Skywalker through the hallways as he slammed into a room. Anakin got furious as he got back to his feet and rushed forward. Yoda knew that there was only one way in which he could feasibly lose this battle, and it was if he allowed Skywalker to stay in the fight for too long. Using Yoda's form required a lot of energy and stamina. If he wasn't wise with it, then he'd pay the price for it. Skywalker ran across the floors, speeding up as he did, but Yoda moved out of the way. Anakin hadn't seen Yoda fight in forever, and there was a genuine worry in his heart. There were rumors that Master Plo Koon beat Yoda in a spar once. The reason this was important to Anakin is because Plo and him used the exact same lightsaber form, so it was some confidence to add to him. Anakin moved as fast as he could, spinning around and trying to catch Yoda in a weak position, but it wasn't working. The Grand Master bounced from wall to wall, avoiding strikes and countering others. Yoda knew that Anakin was a strong fighter, and to engage with him for a long time would only sacrifice his energy. Anakin needed to wear Yoda down, and then he could make it strike. Though the misses that Anakin was making was only making him all the more aggravated. He was flustered because he simply couldn't hit the target. He struck and missed and struck and missed. He felt like a failure, which is something that he didn't want to feel in the moment. Anakin got around and finally caught Yoda. The Grand Master flipped backwards, avoiding a number of heavy assaults made by Skywalker. Anakin, unlike in his duel with Kenobi, wasn't able to constantly engage with Yoda. He tried to remember Dooku's fight with the Grand Master, but it was hard. Anakin had to move faster than he ever did against Obi Wan on Mustafar. He felt a fear because he could see it in Yoda's eyes. There was something that was so unfamiliar, so uncharacteristic for the Grand Master. It was a brokenness that might not ever be resolved, but Anakin knew he would never see it resolved if it was resolved. Yoda was fighting to end the Sith. Anakin was fighting to be the most powerful version of himself, but each step made him feel lesser than an adversary. Against his former master, he was able to overpower him, and the confidence he had from killing Obi-Wan and Sindralic sent him over his head. His arrogance had him believing that anyone would falter to his pure strength. But Yoda wasn't just anyone. Anakin slid backwards, blocking another strike before using the Force and throwing Yoda back. The Grand Master's barrier allowed him to perfectly counter it as he slid across the floors. He looked over at Skywalker and spun his lightsaber in his hand. Anakin's eyes held a piercing yellow tint, and Yoda nodded to himself. This is what had to be done. Skywalker was lost. Anakin spun his own blade in his own hand, and then lowered his chin, as if to say, "I don't fear you." Yoda used the wall as his ally to speed up and make a counterattack. Anakin stumbled backwards, and his balance wasn't the same after that. Skywalker put his blade up in front of him, and he, for the first time since his duel with Dooku, was in a genuine unfavorable position. Anakin tried to dig deeper into his anger, but he backpedaled and it didn't allow him to get anywhere close to it. Skywalker's heavy strikes weren't necessary in the moment. He needed to be dainty, but for him, it was already too late. Yoda leapt off the wall and slashed his blade forward, and felt the weapon slide across Skywalker's chest. The body of Anakin fell to the ground, and Yoda stopped. He looked down and took a breath. He was winded from the encounter. Yoda turned back to the door to see the room that Padme was in. For a moment, Yoda felt totally lost. He grabbed his cane with the Force and walked into the room that Padme was in. She couldn't see the fight, but she could hear it. In her final moments of life, she was crushed by the overbearing weight of sadness, and her life vanished out from under her, under the belief that Obi-Wan was being killed by Anakin. Yoda then looked at the two children in infant pods, the Skywalker twins, currently with the name of Luke and Leia. They sat in these infant pods, and Yoda reached back down to his belt as he grabbed his lightsaber and ignited it. The infants sat quietly, unknowing of the potential fate that sat before them. They were both sleeping, and there was no reason that the calming hum of the lightsaber would wake them. Yoda sat with himself for a moment. What had he become? What did his complacency get him? He was now the antithesis of who he was meant to be. His lightsaber extinguished, and he lowered it to his side, and he fell to his knees. Yoda fell back and leaned against the side of the bed and tapped on a small device to alert Organa to come and pick him up. Yoda used the Force to pull the children's pods towards him. His hubris had cost him himself. Yoda let the pods slowly drift down to his level as he peeked over the top of them. The children didn't even know he was in the room. They didn't even know he just killed their father. They were so unaware, but someday they wouldn't be. Yoda looked down with shame and he spoke to them and told them that he wouldn't ever let anyone hurt them. When Bail got into the room, Anakin's body had been cleared out and Padme was ushered away. Yoda, on the other hand, was still sitting on the floor, having not moved away from the children. Bail came in and asked if he was alright, and Yoda just looked up with despair in his eyes and said that he failed. Bail asked if he was able to defeat Skywalker, and Yoda just shook his head. Defeat Vader he did, but fail Skywalker he also didn't. And that was the conclusion he came to in his own head and in his heart. Bail told Yoda that they should get out of the building. He could talk about it on the Tantive 4. He wasn't leaving, but it was more or less a base of operations due to him having to switch apartments. His was blown up during the Battle of Coruscant. Yoda agreed and got to his feet to follow Bail out of the medical facility. When they eventually got to the ship, Yoda hobbled away. Bail didn't have a chance to really ask Yoda what happened, but he could just see it. One didn't have to use the Force to know what was going on in Yoda's mind. Bail truthfully couldn't wait around for Yoda. The sun was about to rise and the galaxy was about to learn that the Emperor was killed, along with a number of clone troopers. The best part is, the death of Sidious and the death of the clone troopers looked more like an assassination rather than something a Jedi would do. Despite how easy it was for the collective galaxy to blame the Jedi for the war, they would solely be able to be responsible for taking that blame away from the Jedi and put it on someone else. It wouldn't take much. The Jedi weren't exactly in a position to strike back. The fight inside the medical facility wasn't seen by any sentience because it was the middle of the night, and the halls were filled with medical droids. All the cameras had either been destroyed in the heat of the battle, or when Anakin was slammed into the other room, he crashed down on the control panel of the security recordings at the edge of the hallway, so they wouldn't be able to get anything anyways. Yoda sat in the room for hours. He wasn't meditating. He wasn't truthfully doing anything but thinking. His greatest failures over the years were just collectively eclipsed by this. Yoda knew what would happen when he went to confront Anakin. He went to the medical facility with blood on his mind. It was an act of revenge. Yoda knew that Skywalker would be arrogant after defeating Kenobi. He knew he wouldn't have the composure and he would have that arrogance that would lead him to believe he could legitimately stand a chance. Yoda was left with nothing but disappointment in himself. His actions killed any chance at saving Skywalker. He knew it to be unlikely, but he knew it like most things with Anakin. He always had a fad of some sort that he was into for a short while before he found it cringe. Chances are he would have had a similar experience with the dark side. Yoda thought back on all of his actions throughout the years, and how his most recent actions may have just simply cost the galaxy a chosen one. Perhaps he was in the wrong. His mind just played over a continuous loop over and over and over and over again. He couldn't escape it. The one semblance of hope for himself was his actions to spare the children, but why would he even go that far in the first place? Yoda continued to toil over this for hours. On the other side of the galaxy, in deep space, Maul was relishing in something he considered to be remarkable. His master was dead. With Dooku, Sidious, and the Jedi gone, he was the new Sith Lord. He was unaware of Kenobi's death, and he had no knowledge on Skywalker, but with Sidious gone, he could become the one true Sith Lord. Something that despite his disgust towards his master, he was willing to take the mantle of, especially now that there was no one standing in the way of said mantle. Maul's aspirations for growth in a criminal empire remained. However, as a Sith Lord, he might be able to garner a student or two. He was unaware of the plans for the Inquisitorius or even the Grand Inquisitor, but he would find someone to join him. So he continued his quest to find an ally, but he'd be able to cherry pick from the survivors of the Purge. Back on Coruscant, Bail Organa was summoning the Galactic Empire Senate. It just sounded so weird to say. Why an empire? Anyways, Bail called everyone into the Senate chambers and stood on the pod where Sidious would be standing. Despite Masameda's grievances with Bail forcing himself into this position, Masameda existed in a perpetual purgatory of being a yes man. He just went with the flow, and so instead of fighting against Organa, he allowed the senator from Alderaan take the stand inside the Imperial Senate. He stood next to Bail as he would of Sidious. It was kind of weird, but regardless, Bail told the Senate that he'd be taking control over the role of Emperor for the short stint that he had. He gave them a time frame, and he laid out everything he had planned. It was obviously a bit misconstrued considering he pulled an all-nighter to prepare this presentation and speech for the Senate. The main points being, restore peace to the galaxy, end the lust for action, rip apart the system that was placed in front of them, and return to democracy. This did receive some boos and hollers, but Bail didn't care. He told the people that the corporate alliances would have no seat with the Senate, and he did realize how much of a target this put on his head. But as an emperor, he was the most protected man in the galaxy. Yoda inside the Tantive 4 sat with the children. For being infants, they were so quiet. Not a cry since birth. Yoda just sat with them as he held his eyes closed but didn't meditate. He couldn't. There wasn't peace in his heart. The visions he had on Moraband and Dagobah clouded his mind, and he realized that instead of neglecting them for the politics of the council, he should have seen them for what they were. He could have stopped all of this. Yoda didn't realize how close Windu was to being the savior of the Republic, and chances are, he never would know. Yoda kept teetering between two choices. Should he be the one to rebuild the order he lost, or should he forgo the way of the Jedi and allow a broken order to form on his own? He felt responsible for what happened, and truthfully, as a Grand Master, he was. After the Starlight Beacon, he initialized a more rigid Jedi training and the Two Jedi Knight program, which forced Jedi Knights to travel with each other as a duo. He became more complacent over the years and surrounded himself with people in the Council that were just as such. Sure, he gave others opportunities like Sifo Dyas before his death, and Dooku and Qui-Gon, who were both offered spots on the Council, but it didn't change anything. Then Yoda came back to Anakin Skywalker. Perhaps it wasn't that he shouldn't have been brought into the Order, more so that Yoda should have taken his concerns more seriously. Truthfully, he never believed that Skywalker was in any peril and didn't realize, due to all of his years of understanding and coping with loss, that he came off as cold. Then Yoda came to a resolution. He knew what he could do, however, he could not escape the shame he had for having killed Skywalker. Maybe Anakin wouldn't have returned from the darkness, but it wasn't the Jedi way to do what he did. Yoda, with his mission statement in front of him, was given another vessel to use, thanks to Representative Jar Jar Binks, who was integral to keeping the Order alive. Yoda was going to the planet of Corvus to use a Seeing Stone to try and reignite the flame that had been lost. Despite Obi-Wan's message that was now with every Jedi in the galaxy, Yoda had one mission: save the Jedi and set it back on the right path and undo what he spent a lifetime doing. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be what needed to be done, centuries beforehand, truthfully. Yoda made his way out into the galaxy and eventually got his way to Corvus. Luke and Leia were taken care of the entire way to the planet, and when they arrived, Yoda left them inside the ship. He slowly made his way to the Seeing Stone, and eventually, when he arrived, he sat down in the middle of it. Naturally, it should be really easy to activate the Seeing Stone, but Yoda didn't really know if he was deep into the dark side or not. He felt like he had betrayed himself, and by doing that, betraying the Order. He took a deep breath and fell into the Force. The Seeing Stone activated, and he was able to call out into the Force, his only hope being that he hadn't fully lost himself. He opened up the Seeing Stone and he called out into the galaxy. After what felt like an hour, he fell out of the stone. He wasn't knocked out, just tired. 800 years of life will make you tired after a while. He returned to the Naboo ship and waited. A day would pass by before the first Jedi showed up. It was a youngling or a Padawan. Yoda realized who it was. It was young Cal Kestis. Shortly after Cal arrived, more Jedi started coming home. Caloran Beck, Jokal Sanu, Coleman Kaj, Caleb Doom, Gungi Katuni, and even surprisingly Master Infla, who was on his Barish vow when the purge happened, though the message through the Force was enough to bring him away from the vow to see what happened. The devastation within the ranks of the remnants of the Jedi Order was very present. The younglings or Padawans who survived were in shambles. The adults weren't fully prepared to handle the situation, and despite Yoda's optimistic attitude in front of everyone, he couldn't help but feel terrible pain. The thing Yoda hadn't fully realized is that to make the change happen, he needed to fully embody it, not just speak it aloud. He told people to be strong, to have resilience, and to rely on each other, but that's not what Yoda was doing. He was putting up a front, and it only hurt him more in the end. As the days continued by, he couldn't escape it. He was supposed to save the Jedi, but he was doing nothing different than he was doing for centuries. The difficulties for Yoda only continued on from there. But there was a silver lining. With Emperor Organa finishing his short reign as Emperor, the Jedi were permitted to return to the galaxy. Organa told Yoda that he could stay on Alderaan if it would be too traumatic to return to Coruscant, which is an offer that Yoda and his fledgling Jedi Order would take. They waited for a couple months before they made their move. Obviously, a couple Jedi moved early so they could begin constructing the new academy. Yoda stayed behind without the twins, or Grogu, just to redirect any survivors towards the academy. When all was said and done, there were 96 Jedi who survived the Purge with them. The total number of Purge survivors was about 10 more than that, but Yoda didn't know that. The Grand Inquisitor died during a confrontation with Maul, a confrontation that got Maul a brand new student, someone who was a bit younger than him, but held similar ideals, someone who didn't want to be a Sith, but realized the curse of the Jedi was a cycle they and every other being existed within. His name was Baylan Skoll, and he found his home with Darth Maul and Crimson Dawn for the time being. During Yoda's trip from Corvus to Alderaan, something within his mind clicked. He realized that his failures to train Skywalker adequately were his failures to allow the Jedi to flourish, the same failures that ate the Jedi alive time and time again. Yoda decided that he would have to fully let go before he could actually embody the changes he wanted to see. He'd have to let go of the code he held so near and dear for the past 800 years, and he would have to forfeit the role of the Council. There was no place for a council or a Grand Master in this new order. He needed the Jedi to feel as if they could make mistakes, as if they could make choices, as if they could feel the dark side, but instead of falling into the trap that beset Anakin Skywalker, they could openly talk about it and not feel as if they'd be punished. Yoda's demeanor changed. It would be hard, but it would be worth everything if he could change the Jedi Order around for the better. On Alderaan, he got his first look at the new Jedi Academy, and he thought to himself that failure was the greatest teacher. In the shadow of the Clone Wars, the Jedi would rebuild. During the same time, Crimson Dawn would stake itself out in the Outer Rim, until a couple years later the reinstated Republic would march down their throats, Maul and Baylan being two-time survivors of a purge. Over those same years, Ahsoka found herself home inside the Jedi Academy, due to its stark difference from the order she was kicked from. Many others would join this academy, such as former council member Eth Koth, who had been removed from the order during the Clone Wars. Yoda himself looked much younger. This was mostly in part due to the fact that he was no longer just complacently moving through life. He had an energy that he didn't have for centuries. He was moving and acting like a younger man. Of course, his old body hurt, but he was a young man in an old man's body. He wore a smile on his face, much greater than the one he wore before the Clone Wars. He actively participated in teaching all the students, and despite his desire for Dooku to be his last students were Luke, Leia, and Grogu. Yoda focused on training them in particular. However, he was an instructor of many classes, though it wasn't without the joy of one of Yoda's first instructors, Professor Huyang. He had seen thousands upon thousands of Jedi, and while there was a sadness for having lost so many in Order 66, there was healing. Yoda's focus on the three Jedi was purposeful. Luke and Leia because he felt terrible for what he did to their father and what happened to their mother, and Grogu because Grogu would probably get to a similar position in life as Yoda was when he gets older. Yoda had no way of knowing how large the Order would grow in the coming years, but he knew that Grogu wouldn't make the same mistakes that Yoda made. The former Grand Master made several hollow recordings, not just for Grogu, but for all of his students. Ones that would go and be given to them by Professor Huyang when they reached certain ages. For Grogu, he had a new hologram recording that would be given to him every 50 to 100 years. For other students, like humans, they got recordings that would be given to them every 5 to 15 years. And for individuals like Gungi, it was 20 to 40 years. Information, on the other hand, was all recovered from the temple on Coruscant and made much more accessible. There was no longer a restricted section, though there was a buffer. If a knight or a Padawan wanted to learn something in particular, a master had to teach it to them, so they could correctly understand how it worked. Yoda's joy continued for this entire time, and a great addition to it was the location. Thanks to the Queen of Alderaan, Breha Organa, the Jedi were given a sanctuary space out near some mountains and far away from the cities. It gave the Jedi all the space and peace they needed to properly maintain the Order's solitude. A decade after the fall of the Order, Luke and Leia would ask about their lineage. The reason being is that they saw their father's name in the Jedi databases as Anakin Skywalker. He was supposed to be the chosen one. What did that mean? Yoda told the truth to a degree. He told them that Anakin Skywalker was a good man, who didn't have the luxury of the Order they had now. He was manipulated and groomed by the Dark Lord of the Sith, and Yoda blamed himself for not having seen it sooner. Eventually, he was turned to the dark side and ceased to be Anakin Skywalker. This was a twist. He didn't explicitly say that he killed him. All he said is that Anakin turned to the dark side, and that's when he no longer was their father. The good and loving man who would have adored them perished in that moment. The twins were saddened about this, but due to Yoda, they were expressive from a young age that they wouldn't fall like their father did. But these promises followed Yoda's promises to them to not fail them like he had their father. Yoda's acceptance of his failures and mistakes allowed him to be the Jedi he should have been for Anakin, and for this new academy, of course. With the end of Crimson Dawn, Darth Maul would decide it was time to destroy the Jedi, and Baylan was slightly at odds with this. He didn't believe a broken Jedi Order deserved to be punished, as a Jedi Order should have. But he followed his master to Alderaan. In the middle of the night, they struck. But not a body fell. When they arrived at the Academy, they were greeted by Quinlan Vos, Ahsoka, Eth Koth, and Yoda. The four Jedi told them that they did not need to be adversaries. They could have peace. But Maul didn't see it that way. As he rushed the Jedi, thinking Baylan was on his side, he realized how wrong he was. He was cut down quickly by the four Jedi, and Baylan expressed to the Jedi that he didn't want to be adversaries, but he also did not want to support them by becoming a member. The Jedi respected his choice, and they went their separate ways. Yoda would live for an extra decade than he would have had he become a hermit. His excitement and his new sense of direction in life reinvigorated him to becoming the Jedi he should have been for so long. It gave him a sense of regret for not having had this for so long in his own life, but an even greater sense of optimism for the future that sat ahead for other Jedi inside this order. The galaxy reshaped around the principles that Organa laid out years prior, but for Luke and Leia, they'd become what their father could not. Given the ability to make their own choices, just as every other Jedi inside this new order, they did not choose the path of least resistance. They stuck to the Jedi Order and became the best of it. Ahsoka continued through her own journey and even guided them after she learned to move past her own turmoil, especially over Anakin's fall from grace. When Yoda passed away, Ahsoka took up the mantle of overseeing Grogu's teachings, until Luke and Leia would take that same mantle years later. Grogu in the future would become the face of the Jedi Order, and his dedication to the Jedi Order would fulfill a role that his master, Master Yoda, should have fulfilled, for an Order of the Jedi that was truly dedicated to peace, justice, and most importantly, the Force. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Baron The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewoo 670, Anakish Dank Runner, CT7567, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Johnny Nguyen, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Caligan, Linslayer 66, Maverick Studios, Anakin 003, Frodo's Legacy Star Wars, Lemon Knight, Rex the Wolf, the meaning of the first names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Smash that like button if you want to support me in other ways. Go check out the Patreon. There's cool updates on there. We're so close to the Sith Clone Wars coming to an end. I think you have 2 more episodes left, so, you know, that's coming up. Anyways, let's start the story real quick. I don't really have much to say. This story is a Yoda redemption story. That is, in its heart, what it is. This is very focused on Yoda's redemption story. It's the conflict between him and Anakin is meant to feel wrong. It's meant to feel wrong because it is wrong. Yoda goes in there with spite. He goes in there with revenge on the mind, and that's what he does. The failure of his Jedi Order, what he does right there is his embodiment of the Jedi Order he fostered. And so his redemption allows him to live longer. It's the idea that you grow beyond your own failures, and that if you find happiness in everything, then you can have happiness, I suppose. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.